One of the questions that we get asked more than any other is, can you live in your woodland? Normally the first question is, why did you buy one? And the second question is, can you live in it? Plenty of things that you can do, and a few things that will surprise most people as well. So let's get into it. People often picture things like building a log cabin, living off grid permanently in a beautiful place such as this, having solar panels, having a vegetable garden, and having complete freedom because you own the land. But owning woodland doesn't automatically mean that you can do whatever you like. Can you live here? So the main point about permanent residential living, it's effectively a no without the appropriate planning permission. And that's where it starts to get a lot more complex. Woodland isn't residential land, it's forestry land and can only be used for forestry purposes. And simply buying a woodland doesn't change the planning designation that it has. And simply owning the land doesn't automatically give you the right to live on it. And the issue isn't that people harm woodland. Nobody's going to actively go out there, we would hope, if you're a woodland lover, if you're a nature lover. It's that residential use changes how woodland functions, and it changes it in ways that you probably don't imagine when you imagine yourself living there off grid. And that's why the planning authorities are concerned with the change of use, rather than somebody just simply sleeping there occasionally. It's about actually changing the use of the land. So incremental development, living somewhere that it almost always creates extra pressures for more infrastructure. So what starts as a campervan can become a driveway with a larger concreted parking area, fencing, gates, so you're going to have to dig down and put those in. You're probably going to want a shed or a workshop, so that's building, that's creating a structure, maybe having to take trees down to be able to do that. Water tanks, boreholes, are you going to have to do massive groundworks to run pipes in so that you've got fresh water from the mains water? It's okay harvesting rainwater, but that has to be treated and things like that. Septic tanks, drainage. You could probably argue that a compost toilet for a couple of people would be okay, but longer term, certainly thinking about us as we're aging, do we want to be emptying a compost toilet? Solar panels, space for that, would you have to clear areas to do that? Storage for the batteries to store the energy. Fuel storage, if you are in a remote place as we are, you're likely looking at heating oil, so you're going to have to look at storing that. How is that going to affect the woodland? And rubbish, so as humans we do generate rubbish, and recycling. Where is that going to be stored? How is it going to be stored? How is it going to be collected? How is it going to be disposed of? All of those things create this incremental development. As purely humans, we start to move into somewhere. Each individual change might seem minor, but together they permanently, and I mean permanently, alter the woodland. And then as a consequence of that, we have the incremental development leads to potential damage to the wildlife. Woodland is home to species that are sensitive to disturbance, especially at night, and regular residential activity. You're looking at artificial lighting that can affect bats, moths, other nocturnal insects, noise from generators, vehicles coming and going at night and in the day, and general daily living. Are going to have an effect on the wildlife and how it utilises the land. Maybe you're going to have dogs for a bit of security, maybe you're dog lovers like we are. They are potentially going to be disturbing ground nesting birds and ground nesting mammals, so there's that to think about as well. And more frequent human presence can just change animal behaviour. We've all seen the viral videos of squirrels eating out of people's hands, deer knocking on people's doors asking to be fed. It's cute, it's wonderful, it's really nice to have that connection with the wild animals. However, that isn't how they're supposed to be, and it affects their behaviour. You know, if you're feeding a wild animal regularly, you're looking at then starting an intergenerational issue with them even learning how to forage. So if, for example, you moved into the woodland, you were feeding the deer, you were feeding the birds, you were feeding the squirrels, and then suddenly you left, you've got generations and generations of animals that have been reliant on that and maybe don't have those skills to look after themselves. The next thing is the actual ground itself, the soil damage. Woodland soils are surprisingly fragile. Daily vehicle use is going to compact that. Repeated foot traffic is going to, compact that as well. This in turn is going to damage fragile roots of the herbs, the flora, potentially the tree roots as well. It's then going to reduce drainage and water infiltration. So you'll have issues with standing water. And obviously the trees not getting potentially the water that they need because the ground is so compacted. And it's then in turn going to affect the fungi and other microorganisms and invertebrates that support that tree health. So, this incremental development and damage does have a massive knock-on effect over time. Leading on from all of that, and I've mentioned it just now, waste and pollution. Obviously, as humans, we do create waste, we do create pollution just by existing. Even really ecological, responsible people produced grey water from washing, toilet waste, food waste, household rubbish. These all need appropriate management. And in a residential setting, you have got the infrastructure to deal with that. But in a residential way of living, the volume of waste is much greater than a woodland that is used occasionally for recreational use, forestry purposes. An example of that is, we come here for a day, we take all our rubbish home with us, and it fills a crisp packet. That's, but if we were living here, we would have a lot more rubbish, a lot more potential for contamination. You can argue here at the woodland, if I'm washing up, I use eco-friendly washing up liquid. We have eco-friendly hand soap for when we're washing our hands, just in case it gets on the earth. But, as you start to get to the point where, you're using more and more potentially chemicals, even if you're trying to be ecologically friendly like we are, it's going to have an impact. And what that all then sort of leads to is the essential loss of woodland character. At what point does it stop becoming a woodland and start becoming a residential property? The planning policy that so many of us maybe buck up against. I know we've had moments where we've thought, oh, wish we could do this, wish we could do that. When you actually delve deeper, it's there for a reason. And if lots of people lived in small woods, there would be the extra pressure for the wider infrastructure as well. So better roads, the lane that serves the woodland is a single metalled road, grass growing down the middle. If all of the woodlands locally suddenly became residential, there would be pressure to widen that and to resurface it. You're looking at the extra utility connections that I've talked about. People are going to want running water from the mains, they're going to want electricity, perhaps they're going to want gas. All of that is going to mean digging up a lot of land to be able to do that. Even your grocery delivery is going to put pressure on the local environment. Emergency vehicle access as well. If looking at this woodland, we decided or got permission to put a house in the middle of it, we would then automatically have to cut a load of trees down for it to be wide enough to get a fire engine in if the house ever set alight. We don't want to do that. Postal services as well. Everybody's used to getting their post every day. Well, not necessarily every day nowadays, but hey ho. Lots of deliveries, lots of people use online deliveries, things like that. And that is then going to increase the pressure on these woodlands that are in the more isolated parts of the UK, for more permanent buildings and that sort of thing. So over time, what you'd be looking at is many woods would become more like scattered residential developments than natural habitats. And I think that's the key point. It's a scales, it's a balance. You have really got to look at, when does it tip over into harming the natural world? And it is a delicate balance that I think we really need to think about before we start planning these log cabins and such. And by no means am I saying that all residents would be irresponsible. I think that's an important nuance for me to mention. Many woodland owners, including us, we're incredibly careful when we come. We stick to the small portion of the ride that we use. We stick to the footpaths in the woodland, if you like. I mean, it's just the quickest access routes that we've adopted, but we try not to, you know, go off those routes to leave you know, maybe a resting hare or you know, ground nesting bird in the longer grasses. Don't disturb them. And I think our environmental footprint here is, during a day's visit or a couple of days even, is actually less than our own back garden. And we, you know, do manage our back garden for wildlife as well. So I think that sort of just serves to show how little of a footprint we do have. And again, going back to the planning system, I think a lot of people see them as somebody to battle. However, they're not judging individual behaviour. Instead, they're setting rules that work across thousands of different situations, and they have to, you know, be prepared for any different situation as it arises. And if permanent residential use of woodlands were generally allowed, there would inevitably be cases that were permitted that then went on to cause significant environmental damage. So that's why the planning authorities have to be as strict as they are. So interestingly, you know, the rules aren't there because they assume woodland owners are irresponsible. They're there because living somewhere changes the way the land is used, changes the way that the land is protected and allowed to be wild. And once a woodland becomes someone's home, it's not really something that you're ever going to go back on. It's really rare for a woodland property to have the property taken out and the woodland restored. So simply sleeping in a woodland is not harmful, but I just want to sort of help you understand the reasoning behind the planning rules, the changes of uses, the designation of woodland land, forestry land, you know, farming land, equine land, all of those things. There are big reasons behind why they are designated specifically under the planning legislation.
But there are people who have managed it. One of those is Jay's Charcoal in Midhurst, a successful application. It's probably the classic example. The owner ran a traditional charcoal burning business using a woodland that was actually managed for forestry as well. The charcoal kilns needed continuous supervision during the burn cycle, as they do. This lasted around a week. And an agricultural forestry advisor concluded that there was a genuine functional need for someone to live on site because the work involved fire, high temperatures, constant monitoring. But I think what's really interesting and shows just how high the bar is, permission wasn't granted simply because somebody wanted to live in a woodland. It was because they demonstrated that functional need, and they were granted a temporary 3-year permission, which was only later made permanent once the enterprise had proved itself financially viable.
And the second example that I'll give is another charcoal place in South Downs National Park. I think this one was more recent. I keep spotting muntjac. I think Bambi's over there, but anyway. So the business managed, it was a really decent size. It was 14, 20 hectares, something like that, producing charcoal year round. And again, the planning inspector accepted that the charcoal kilns needed day and night supervision. There was a genuine fire risk in the woodland. The woodland was being actively managed for forestry purposes as well. At that point, the business had actually, I think, demonstrated that long-term viability. So it was already in a position where it could prove that it was a successful business. And so they accepted that there was an essential need. So our situation is we don't want to live here. We don't ever want to pursue living on this land. We have our home in our hometown and we like our home. We like our lives out there, family over that way, work out that way. I love my job. I wouldn't want to leave and move away. But we do stay late at the woodland. We, come for long days in winter and summer. We have stayed here at night awake, so not slept, because we've been maybe looking out for bats, moths, surveys, things like that we've done before, and we will continue to do because we, always need to monitor those species. We've had late evenings round the fire and then driven home late, but we do stay over. I wouldn't say it's very often, and certainly this time of year, when it is the nicest time of year to be camping, we don't, because we have nice long days and we can get lots done. It's more in the winter that we actually stay over when it's cold and miserable, because we need to make the most of the daylight hours, and then we use head torches and carry on. So the next question is, can you camp here? What does the legislation say? And I think this is where it gets a little bit confusing, because when you're looking at protecting the woodland, occasional camping is very different to making it your home. Like I said, we actually stay over here, not very regularly. It's more in winter. However, in terms of the legislation, which I've linked in the description, so I would encourage you to look into that, read it yourself, because I'm no expert. I have simply read it and made my own conclusions on that. But prior to around July 2024, the legislation said that you were permitted 28 days per year change of use, which included camping for amenity recreational purposes. Now, before that, it actually been increased, I think, to 56 days during the pandemic, because more people wanted to be out in nature and everything, and then maybe had a bit of extra time if they were furloughed from work. But then it was reduced again to the 28 days, which is always what it had been. July 2024, they changed it to 60 days per year, but with a pop-up campsite license. This is where it gets a bit more interesting. So from all the research that I did at the time, because we owned the woodland at that time when it changed, the NFU, National Farmers Union, were aware that farmers in the UK, are in terrible peril because of their income. And I think we've all watched, well, maybe some of you have watched Clarkson's Farm and are aware of the plight of our UK farmers. And a lot of them are having to diversify to keep the farms going, which I completely understand. I'm in full support of our UK farmers. So the NFU, I believe, campaigned to government to have the 28 days extended, because what that would mean for farmers is they could have their woodlands, some of their fields, use them for temporary campsites to bring an additional income to shore up the farm funding and keep the farm going. However, when the government brought the 60-day in, they took away, so the legislation now states that it's 28 days per year change of use, except camping, not camping, I think, except when it's a festival or something. But if you want to do camping in a woodland, you have to apply to your local authority for a 60-day pop-up campsite. And again, double check all the legislation, do your own reading on this, but I think you've got to provide a toilet and rubbish disposal. What that looks like in reality, I've spoken to people who have had licenses approved for the 60 days where they've had a compost toilet and a wheelie bin on site. Again, speak to your local planning department if that's the route that you want to go down. We don't wish to waste our time applying for a campsite license, the 60-day, when the woodland is not a commercial campsite and it never will be, even a temporary one, certainly not under our ownership. So we rely on staying in the woodland under the forestry workers exemptions, the Caravan Site Act 1960, I think it is. Again, I'll link it in the description. But that says that forestry workers can have a forestry shelter, and they can actually stay in a woodland for a season, for a period of work, whether it's forestry, afforestation. And again, as I've said many times before, I'm not trying to justify our reasons for camping here. Trust me, you know, it's not luxurious. It really isn't. It's a wonderful thing to do. We've always enjoyed camping and glamping, but we often will come here for a few days and book a B&B in the local town, because, you know, staying off grid can just be a pain. So, you know, it's not that we do it for that reason, but, you know, we are here for a genuine reason. So we do stay over, but not very often. Speaking of the shelter, leading on to buildings, actual structures in woodlands. So, can you build a log cabin? Can you build a tiny house? Can you build a shed? Can you build a workshop? Can you build a log store? Now, buildings genuinely required for forestry operations may sometimes be possible under forestry permitted development rules, but that does not mean building a cabin for leisure purposes or somewhere to live. The actual purpose of the building matters. Our tiny woodland is tiny, and I don't think we have a genuine need currently for a permanent structure because of the way we manage it, the fact that we only use hand tools and things like that. However, if as things go on, we start needing more tools, more storage, then yes, we would look into putting some kind of secure structure to store all of that, the more valuable stuff. I've said before, we don't keep anything here that, you know, is valuable, and every time we arrive, we are prepared for the fact something might have been stolen, something might have been vandalised. So it really does depend on that. And even down to our compost toilet, it isn't a building or a structure. And that was to, I suppose, really avoid the planning legislation, avoiding needing to go into that, because it would have to be a movable structure. And it's private enough to just have a toilet in the bushes. Check out the toilet video. If you've not watched it, you'll be able to see where it's located, how we've done that. And again, the forestry shelter, the Dandy, it is temporary, it is movable. We do move it around the woodland, and we could very easily just tow it out to go on holiday in, and it wouldn't be here permanently. So it does meet all of that sort of criteria, and it's used for the forestry shelter purposes. We would say that again, I just want to stress this, we've made these decisions based on our own research, and I would certainly urge you to do the same. Another thing that I wanted to mention is fires, having a campfire. Some people think they're not good for the ecology, and disagree with fires anyway. I completely understand that. Some people think fires are illegal out in the countryside. Now, private woodland owners can generally have campfires on their own land, but I think the key thing to observe there is make sure there's no local restrictions. I mean, we are in the middle of a drought, and like I said, it's August 2026 at the moment, and the news is filled with wildfires, and it's heartbreaking, and most of them, the vast majority of them, have been started by people leaving things like bottles, concentrating the sun's rays, starting a spark, having barbecues, having fires. As long as your woodland, you have done a risk assessment, not a written one, just in your own head, to make sure that there aren't any wildfire risks, and that any fire you do have is managed responsibly. So we don't have fires on the actual ground here. We said from the word go we didn't want to damage the soil. And you can argue that, you know, we've got the washing machine drum that we use the most. It's raised up on bricks. You could argue that is going to heat the ground, but we didn't want to leave ash, you know, and charred remains and what have you. And we now haven't had a fire in this woodland since, I think, early spring. The fires that we do have in winter, if we're coming for the day, we need a fire. We really genuinely need a fire to keep warm, because even the physical work doesn't keep us warm. And we only burn wood from the woodland now, so we don't burn plastics, anything like that would give off a chemical or noxious smoke. So we are very careful, and we are, you know, within our rights to do that. In conclusion, if you're looking at buying woodland because you think it's going to be a cheap place to build a house and live, you are probably going to be disappointed. If you're buying a woodland because you want somewhere to reconnect with nature, it could possibly be the best decision you ever make. We are happy with the situation. We are happy to abide by all of the rules. I think people maybe assume that buying woodland is about escaping society forever. For us, it isn't. It's somewhere to disappear to for a day, somewhere that we can hear birds and leaves rustling in the breeze instead of traffic and sirens and the TV. And it's somewhere that we can improve nature and have an impact on, and do all of the things that we do and feel good about it, have all the glimmers, and then we go home. And I think that's, you know, a lovely ending, and a lovely way to contribute to the wild world. So thank you for watching. As always, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, please do. I see so many of these videos people watch and they don't subscribe, or they don't like. Maybe you watch it and you don't like us and you're never going to come back. But if you would like to follow us and see more videos, then please do that. You're very, very welcome. And I'll see you in the next one.